The book of Matthew, chapter 24, is where we're at. And I will try to bring this, since we are going to be a few weeks from picking this back up. I said try, didn't say I would do it for sure, but I'm going to try to bring this to some sort of a stopping point and a conclusion today. And we'll see how that goes.
What, like 10?
Yeah, I don't know. So we actually read through 15 and got to this. And of course, just to remind you, Jesus is answering the disciples' questions in this chapter. They asked him in the first 3 verses, after he tells them that the temple will be destroyed and that judgment will befall this religion and this nation. And they ask him a compound question saying, tell us when these things be, when are you coming, and what shall be the sign and the end of the world? That's their 3-part question. What's the narrative? What's the timeline? What's the events? What's the picture of how all of that plays out? And so Jesus begins to answer in verse 4. It says, Jesus answered and said, take heed that no man deceive you. So again, straight out of the gate, I would venture to say that means that there's going to be deception when it comes to these things. And so he begins to tell them about things that will befall and things that will take place before the time that he returns and before the time of the end. Because he talks about the fact that there'll be wars and rumors of wars. He says, but don't be troubled. All of these things must come to pass. But he says, but the end is not yet. So some of these things are going to happen in the interim between his ascension and his return. And all of these things, realistically, that we've spoken of up till this point, only delineate that time as a whole. So the wars and rumors of wars really has been something that has been ongoing since the time that Jesus Christ walked the earth. As he departed, Rome began to crumble very, very shortly thereafter, and other nations arose, and there began to be wars and fightings, and we've been fighting and warring, and we all know that even in our time. And of course, you hear about it on the news every day, but it's true. I mean, there's war going on in the world right now. It doesn't feel real to us most of the time because we're not getting shot at, but to those that are there, it feels very, very much real. And in verse 8, he says, after talking about the fact that there's going to be nation that rises against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and again, he's saying this in basically what amounts to a one-world government at that time. Now, there were, yes, way out, there were people that weren't really ruled by Rome, but at that time, the known world was ruled by the government of Rome. And so he says it's kingdom against kingdom, and he says there'll be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in divers places. So all of these things will take place. And he says this is just the beginning of sorrows, verse 8. This is just the beginning. And I think as we talked about the last couple of weeks, all of these events, and the Bible leads us to believe that these things will increase and will grow and will get to a boiling point, if you will, as this end of time draws near. And of course, what we're going to get into today talks about the fact that, and we'll explain it as we go forward, really all of the end time events are pretty much put into and encapsulated in a 7-year period of time. Okay, and so we're gonna look at that and kind of get into the finer points of it. But he goes on to tell them that after this there'll be those that will be offended, and that will afflict them and that will kill them for his witness. He says that many will betray one another and will hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and deceive many. And he goes on to make the statement, but because that iniquity will abound, the love of many will wax cold, meaning the natural love that we have for one another. And this is speaking of the world more than it is Christians. And of course, we talked about the fact last week that the world is systematically being desensitized to violence and to evil and that sort of thing. And I mean, the things that even the world didn't really broadcast a decade and a century ago are now, everywhere to see. There was at least a time where they tried to obscure some of the worst things from those that really didn't need to be seeing or hearing it, and now it's not even a consideration. I mean, even in all realms really, but language that used to didn't be put on anything is now everywhere. I mean, we a lot of people love him, but really in just the modern era, the last president or two have been the first one that just decided that vile language was just okay as part of your campaign and your speech to people in the crowds that have men, women, children, everybody, and it doesn't seem to affect or bother them. But anyway, he said that because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. And of course, we covered the verse, but he that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved. And we talked about the fact that this is not a picture of how salvation works. This is talking about they'll be saved from this time that if they endure to the end. We understand and know, because all Scripture has to agree with all Scripture, that the way we attain salvation of the soul is not by enduring anything to the end. It's by believing on the Lord Jesus Christ. And he says, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. So you can see that Jesus is talking here through some things, okay? And he's giving a timeline, because he talks about the fact, if you go back in verse 6, he says there'll be wars and rumors of wars. Know that these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. So do y'all see the idea of a timetable being put on some of this? And so you get to verse 14, and he says the gospel will be preached to all the world for a witness unto all nations. After all of these things, where many false prophets arise, iniquity will abound, the love of many shall wax cold. This is a time period known as the beginning of sorrows.
So, in these first verses before it goes, I think it's 21, it says the Great Tribulation, we're in for all that before that?
Well, here's kind of the timeline given, and we'll get into this. Where it talks about in verse 8, these are the beginning of sorrows. I think, and it's going to bear out here in just a minute, that would mark the beginning of what most people call the tribulation. Now, if you really go with Scripture right here, this time of tribulation is only really attributed to the last 3.5 years of this 7-year period after the Abomination of Desolation. This time that we're looking at here that leads up to the Abomination of Desolation is what's referred to here in Scripture as the beginning of sorrows.
Which is what people call pre-tribulation, right?
Well, pre would mean before the whole 7-year time frame.
So we would be technically pre-tribulation.
Well,
or is it as in it's getting worse and worse and worse before the tribulation?
Correct. Okay. Yeah. And again, this is why we have to take all of this into account. And the best thing that you can do right here, if it's possible, is take all of the preconceived notions of how these events play out and set those to the side and just read what the Bible talks about is going to happen. And so, yeah, we'll get into it with Daniel here in just a second. But he says verse 8, all these are the beginning of sorrows. And so this time period leading up to here, where all the gospel will be preached, and then he says in verse 14, then the end shall come, or then shall the end come. I think this is those first 3.5 years. Now, again, we have always termed it, if I say the tribulation, okay, immediately you're going to think that's the 7 years at the end of time, okay? technically speaking, two things. One, the whole period is never given the title of the tribulation. Okay? And only the second half, after this abomination of desolation, it says, then shall be a time of great tribulation. Great trouble, great tribulation. And that's only attributed to that second half. The first half is what's referred to as the beginning of sorrows, meaning it's a sorrowful time for humanity and for...
So what's happening today is like nothing compared to what was going to happen.
Exactly. And post abomination of desolation, and we'll get there, it says there has never been a time on earth where it's been that bad, nor will there ever be. So that's how bad we're talking. And so there's been some horrible things that have happened. I mean, the Holocaust has happened, World War, all of these things. He says nothing like that. It's worse than everything. So just understand that's where we're headed. But he says this is just the beginning of sorrows. And he says the gospel, all this will happen. The gospel will be preached, and then shall the end come. And we got to right here. It says, when ye shall see the abomination, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. And that last parenthetical statement right there, whoever reads, let him understand, is important, because Jesus is not here trying to obscure truth. He is trying to explain truth, and he is trying to tell his disciples this is the way it's going to be.
He's not the author of confusion.
Exactly. And he is not speaking of any kind of spiritual only occurrences, where he talks about that there's going to be kingdom rise against kingdom, wars, earthquakes, pestilence. This is not spiritualized. The preterist spiritualizes all of this because they have to explain how this all happened in 70 AD and we're now living in the kingdom. That doesn't even begin to register when it comes to these. Yeah, when it comes to these. But it says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. So, we're going to have to take a minute and go and see, all right, what did Daniel say about this abomination of desolation? And so if you go to the book of Daniel, in chapter 9, and there's much in the book of Daniel. Really, as a whole, Daniel gives more prophecy surrounding the time of the end up until the point where Jesus and Revelation pick up than anyone else. And so just a little bit of background, and I'll have to hurry. But Daniel's already been given, if you read the whole book of Daniel, now there's obviously stories of Daniel in the lion's den. That's what most of us would remember, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the fiery furnace.
And in the wall.
Exactly. There's many of those stories, and that's obviously part of the book of Daniel, very important. But there's also a bigger overarching narrative to the book of Daniel, and that is that Daniel, way back when, in exile in Babylon, is given prophecies surrounding the end of the world. Now, that's God that did that, and it's God that allowed him to see these things. And in fact, if you go back in the early chapters of Daniel, I think it's Daniel chapter 2 or 3. Anyway, I didn't really look at this part of it, but just know Daniel's already been given the interpretation to King Nebuchadnezzar's dream that surrounds the 4 coming nations that are going to be in place during the time period when God is dealing with his nation of Israel. Okay? And so, it's delineated by a statue that is seen, and of course the head of gold, the chest of brass, the legs of bronze, or the belly of bronze and the feet and of iron and toes of clay. But just understand that all of those are given a picture, and the interpretation is given, and basically God's saying, King Nebuchadnezzar, your dream has to do with the whole future of the world and its kingdoms. And so we know that there's going to be that final kingdom that is in place is a one world government and system that will have its ruler as the Antichrist. And so, again, without too much time being taken here, in Daniel chapter 9, Daniel's been given visions. Daniel's been given all sorts of communication from heaven about all of these events. And in 9 through 12, scenarios are played out about, again, some of it being the near future with the kingdoms that he's involved with, be it Babylon, the Medo-Persian Empire, the future Greek, and then the Roman Empire. All of that is kind of laid out for Daniel. And again, that's a gross oversimplification, but we're studying Matthew, not Daniel. But here in chapter 9, Daniel receives word from heaven about a time period that is going to be about the end of time. And so just understand, Daniel here, and you can go back, I encourage you to go back. You've actually already read these in homework. But in chapter 9, Daniel receives word, and Daniel is told this right here concerning the prophecies for Israel. He says, this is the angel speaking to Daniel here. He says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon the holy city. Now, the holy city would be Jerusalem, okay? All right. This is what this 70 weeks that are determined is for. He says to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Now that's a pretty extensive list. Okay? Part of this list has already been done. But part of this list has not been done. Okay? Now, to finish the transgression and make an end of sins, that was accomplished. That was accomplished on Calvary. And to make reconciliation for iniquity, Jesus did that for us. That has been done. To bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy. Anybody here think that prophecy is still yet to be fulfilled, like me? Prophecy is not finished. And to anoint the most holy. Now, Jesus has not yet been anointed King of Kings and Lord of Lords to rule and reign over the earth in Jerusalem. So that is still yet future. And then he begins to break down how this will happen and how this will be fallen. Just, again, so you understand, the word week, if you go to the old Hebrew word, is just a group of 7. We call it a week because it's a group of 7 what? Days. Okay? The week that is given here is obviously a group of 7, but it is a group of 7 years. Okay? Not 7 days. Okay? And we know this because history has already played out on 69 out of 70 of these weeks. Okay? And so we understand and know. And it says, know therefore. So again, it's about knowing and understanding. You find these phrases over and over. You think about how many times in the Bible it's written that so-and-so may know, that Pharaoh may know, that my people may know. God is not trying to keep us in the dark. God's trying to let us know. And God has always told His people what was going to happen. He says, know therefore and understand. Now, Daniel is sitting in Babylon in captivity. Jerusalem's been destroyed and the temple's been destroyed. There's nothing left of Daniel's home when it comes to the nation of Israel. There is no nation of Israel. There's a group of people in exile, and that's it. Okay? It says, know and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, this did not even seem anywhere remotely possible sitting in Babylon. But this is what Daniel's being told. Just know, Daniel, from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince. Now who's that? Jesus, obviously. Okay? He says, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Now, a score is 20, so 60 is 60 and 2. So 62 and 7 is what? 69. Okay, so 69 weeks. And there's a break here, and most Bible scholars think that the only reason that there's 2 groups of these weeks in between the going forth of the commandment to Messiah the Prince is because in 7 weeks or 49 years, the prophet Malachi would write, and that would be the end of the Old Testament. That would be the closing out of the time of the prophets, and then there will be 400 years in between, give or take, then and the birth of Christ. But just understand, it says, from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, or 69 weeks. Okay, 490 years. Okay? And it says that, and the street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. Okay? Again, this is all prophecy from a point where Jerusalem is destroyed. Nothing's going on. And it says, and after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. So here you got 7 weeks and 62 weeks, okay, 69 weeks, okay. It says that the wall and the street will be built again, even in troublous times. And of course, if you read in the book of Nehemiah, as Nehemiah began to build the wall, what did they have? Trouble. All the nations round about them, when they saw them starting to rebuild, gave them hassle and trouble, and that's where they had to have a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other to be able to do what they were doing. But this is important. After the 62 weeks, so after the 69 weeks total, it says Messiah will be cut off. Now, the words cut off in the Old Testament mean to be killed. Okay, so after this time period, it says Messiah will be cut off, but not for himself. Jesus wasn't killed for himself. Who was he killed for? For us. Okay? Just so you know, literally to the day of Daniel getting this prophecy, right, or from the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem, which was given by King Artaxerxes for Nehemiah and for Ezra to go back and to restore and to build Jerusalem and to build the temple. Jesus Christ rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. And his own people glorified God and said, wow, it's wonderful. 3 days later, they crucified him.
Yep.
Okay? He was cut off. And it works out perfectly in biblical prophecy. Now, what none of these prophets could see or understand was that there was going to be a gap between the 69th week and the 70th week. You and I are living in the gap because the 70th week has not started yet. And this is interesting. Again, prophesied 500 and something years BC. Okay? There wasn't a temple at the time. There would be a temple rebuilt. Now the temple's there, and Jesus has told his disciples that it's going to be destroyed, but really here Daniel even foretold of that all the way back, because he says here, and this is very important, he says, and the people of the prince that shall come. Now this is referencing the Antichrist that is going to come. Okay? The people of that prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So Daniel really prophesies about the fact that the temple that's, again, there's not one there now. There will be one rebuilt. And this would all have looked impossible from where Daniel was sitting, but it all happened exactly like it's foretold.
You know that temple you don't have?
Yeah.
We're going to
Yeah, there's going to be, it's going to get destroyed again. Okay? So all of this is foretold. He says, in the end thereof shall be with a flood, and to the end of the war desolations are determined. Okay? And truly in the nation of Israel, ever since that time, there's been massive amounts of desolation on that people. Again, they went through the Holocaust. It was really a Holocaust of sorts when they went in and destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD, because they massacred the large portion of the Jewish population there. Mm-hmm. But he goes on to say, and this is the antecedent of that would be the prince that shall come. Okay? That's the last person mentioned. So when it says here, and it's talking about that prince that shall come, the Antichrist. He says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for how long? 1 week. Okay, so there is your 70th week. Remember, 9:24 starts off with 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. He's just told about the 69 that'll take place till Messiah is cut off. And here we see him introducing the final week. He said that he shall confirm, the Antichrist, the prince that shall come, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, 7 years. Okay? Now, what is that covenant? Good question. Okay?
So this 7 years here is the tribulation.
This is what we would term the tribulation period. This is the final 7 years.
I bet the covenant is the one-world government.
Again,
Not
to get off on any kind of real mass speculation. It has something to do with an agreement, a covenant. That's what a covenant is.
He shall confirm the covenant with many.
Right.
For 1 week.
For 1 week, for 7 years. There's going to be some type of 7-year treaty, 7-year agreement that has to do with all of these prophetic events. It just said, we don't know what that covenant is. Some people speculate that it's to allow Israel to rebuild their temple. Maybe as part of the covenant, that's what they're allowed to do. Don't know.
Yeah.
Okay? But he's going to confirm a covenant with them for 7 years or for 1 week. This is where we get back into what we came here for, which is the abomination of desolation. And it says, and in the midst. Okay, what's midst mean? In the middle, okay? In the middle of the week, in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. Okay? Meaning that at this point in time of the end, the sacrifice and the oblation will be taking place again. Okay? They do not sacrifice animals in Israel right now. You know why? They don't have a temple. You have to have the temple. You have to have the furniture and the devices in the temple to be able to do their sacrifices. And so it says he will confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he's going to cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. He's going to do something in the midst of that week, 3.5 years in the midst of that week, that's going to cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. Jesus said, when you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. This is the event that Jesus was referencing in Matthew chapter 24. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation, Daniel is here being told, this prince that shall come is going to make a covenant with many for 1 week, that final 7-year period. And in the middle of that week, in the midst of that week, he himself is going to cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, committing the abomination of desolation. It says, for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. Now, again, do we have picture and type of this? Yes. I think Antiochus Epiphanes in 167 BC was a picture of this. He offered a pig on the altar in the temple to Zeus. Okay. What this individual is going to do, I don't know. But whatever he does inside of that temple will be an abomination and will desecrate and desolate the temple.
There was some assumptions in fiction that the Antichrist might ride a big pig to the temple, and then when he made it there, he would probably like slit its throat and all that.
I
Right.
think it'll be way more, like, not to get off on anything, I'm sorry,
Mhm.
but I think it'll be a lot, almost Catholic-like, in its ceremonious thing.
Right. Well, and because here's where if you just read the Bible, it tells us what he's going to do. It says he's going to stand in the holy place and declare himself to be God. That is the abomination of desolation.
Not so much the actual killing.
Yeah, whatever he does is any action surrounding that, but he is going to set himself up, and he is going to set up an image, probably of himself. The Bible just says the image. It's the beast in his image. Okay? It's going to be set up in the temple. That's the abomination of desolation. He says, she'll make it desolate. Look at this. Even until the consummation. So it is going to remain desolate until everything is complete, until the consummation. That's the end of it. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Okay? So it's going to remain desolated until all things are done and everything that is poured out on the desolate. Now, skipping ahead, and again, I encourage you, you're welcome to read all of this in between. There's a lot of infill details. But Daniel becomes worried and is trying to gain some understanding about all of these things. Daniel is worried to the point of being sick, honestly. The Bible tells us, but it says, and I heard, but I understood not. And again, you have to go back and look through the middle of all of this, that all of these events are taking place. God has given Daniel a more detailed look at all of the things that will happen. And he says, "Oh my Lord, what shall be the end of these things?" He's having trouble understanding how it all wraps up and how everything's in. And verse 9 is instrumental. Okay? And he said, this is the angel speaking to Daniel, "Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end." He's telling Daniel, just write it down. Daniel didn't understand everything he was writing. He said, Daniel, just write it down. It's sealed till the time of the end. Now, I think John picked up the proverbial pen from Daniel and wrote Revelation and opened all of this because, again, technically, we've been living in the end time since Jesus left, and so this is sealed up. Daniel didn't understand, didn't get it all, but this is very, very important right here. It's sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly. And none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. Is it possible for you and I to understand events and things surrounding the end of time? Yeah, it's possible. The wicked don't understand it. Look, I'll promise you, the world does not think that there's going to be a final judgment. In fact, they're banking on the fact that there's not going to be one. Okay? Just understand that. And he says here, it says, and this is key. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away. Now he's just referenced, this is all in one paragraph right here, talking about the abomination of desolation when he causes the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. He says, from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up. Okay, so from that event, there shall be 1,290 days. Now that's pretty specific right there. Okay? So now we have a timetable for how these events play out. And he goes on to say, blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 and 30 days. Okay? Now that's a difference there, obviously, of 45 days. Okay, and we can discuss that later. But there's two quantities of days given there, and he says, "But go thy way till the end be." And this is very interesting and very important here. He says, "For thou shalt rest." Daniel would go on to die. Daniel's buried and in the ground as we speak, physically. He says, "For thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of the days." So Daniel's going to be back standing in his lot at the end of these days. And so that's a little bit from the book of Daniel here. And so we see here, and I want to try to bring this to a little bit of a close, okay? We see Jesus starting to give the timeline for these things that are going to happen. He begins to lay out the fact that there's going to be a time of beginning of sorrows where these events will begin to take place. There's going to be the covenant with many. Now who the many are and what the covenant is exactly, I think only God knows at this point in time. But something about that covenant allows Israel to start doing their daily sacrifice and oblation. And that's why myself, along with many, and again, I'm not saying this is 100%, I'm not willing to move on this, but it looks like to me that the covenant has to do with the fact that Israel will be allowed to build their temple and will be allowed to begin doing their daily sacrifices and the oblations that they do from the temple, because for him to be able to step in the midst of that week and cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, there has to be a sacrifice and an oblation going on. And that event that we see here in verse 15, when you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoke of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, just let him that reads this know and understand this is what Daniel was talking about. Okay? When you see these things take place, just know that this is what's going on. Okay? And to bring it to where we're gonna get to here, he says, let them which be in Judea, verse 16, when you see these things, let you understand, those that be in Judea flee into the mountains, because Judea is the area around Jerusalem. Okay? Again, we Americans like to Americanize everything, okay? We like to think that end times events are about us. It's no different than when we just had this recent solar eclipse and people were talking about how this is a sign of the end. And biblical prophecy has absolutely nothing to do with the United States of America. It has everything in the world to do with a small piece of land in the Middle East known as Israel. Okay? That's what everything that has to do with end time events centers around Jerusalem.
Even if the Antichrist does come into power, his place will not be in Washington, D.C., but somewhere near Jerusalem.
Exactly. He's gonna stand in the temple and declare himself to be God.
Antichrist isn't Trump or...
Yeah.
I would try to move from Washington, D.C. over there.
I doubt it. I don't. Personally, I mean, this is just me talking here because we got to go. I do not see America anywhere in end times events.
I think if anything, he would be a Jew or someone who grew up over there, either multiple religions or something.
He can't be American and be the Antichrist.
Right.
He's got to be...
I'm thinking Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
Which would make far more sense. Again, pure speculation. Take this with a grain of salt. If I had to guess what he was going to look like, I would guess something like that picture that everybody has that's supposedly Jesus.
Maybe probably a drop-dead gorgeous kind of guy.
Because
The concept of that would be like, oh, that looks like
Exactly. And of course, we'll have time to get into all this. I'm out of time for today, but just understand, the disciples asked Jesus to explain to them what was going to happen. Jesus begins to explain it to them. And he is telling them the events and the things that are going to happen and going to befall at the end of time. So y'all get a break and we'll come back and pick it